When Professor Klein projected the private text messages onto the screen during the lecture, Jude's secret was exposed to 200 students in an instant. The whispers that followed weren't just gossip. They were the beginning of his complete isolation at Oakwood University, and none of them could have guessed the letter he would leave behind would echo through their lives forever. Jude sat frozen in the back row of the auditorium-style lecture hall, his dark wavy hair falling into his eyes as the words, "I think I'm falling for you, Jason," flashed in giant letters above the whiteboard. The class erupted in a wave of gasps, then nervous laughter, then silence. Jason, seated 3 rows ahead with his athletic frame slumped in the chair, didn't turn around. He just stared straight ahead, his light blonde hair catching the overhead lights, his shoulders rigid. Jude's phone had slipped from his pocket during a group discussion earlier that morning, and someone, maybe the girl next to him, had handed it to the professor thinking it was a lost item. Now the entire Psych 301 class knew. By the time the lecture ended, the damage was done. Students filed out in clusters, shooting glances over their shoulders at Jude as if he carried some contagious disease. No one spoke to him. Not the girl who had borrowed his notes last week. Not the guy he had partnered with on the midterm project. Even the professor avoided eye contact while erasing the board. Jude gathered his backpack slowly, his hands trembling, the weight of 24 pairs of eyes still burning into his back. He walked through the crowded hallway alone, the usual chatter parting around him like water around a rock. That afternoon in the cafeteria, the boycott began in earnest. Jude set his tray down at the end of a long table where he usually sat with a loose group of acquaintances. Within minutes, every seat around him emptied. Trays scraped, chairs pushed back, voices dropped to murmurs. "Did you hear?" One girl whispered loud enough for him to catch. "He's gay. Like actually gay." Another guy snorted. "Explains why he never joined the intramural teams." Jude stared at his untouched salad, the lettuce blurring as tears threatened. He had come to Oakwood from a conservative suburb outside Portland thinking college would be different, more open, more accepting. He had only told one person his secret, Jason, his roommate from freshman year, and the only real friend he had made in 3 years. Jason had listened that night in their dorm, nodding quietly while Jude poured out years of confusion and quiet longing. "It's cool, man," Jason had said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Doesn't change anything." But now Jason was nowhere to be seen. Jude finished his lunch alone, the clatter of the cafeteria feeling like 1,000 tiny accusations. Back in their shared off-campus apartment that evening, Jason didn't come home until after midnight. Jude lay awake on the couch, listening to the key turn in the lock, the soft footsteps that paused outside his door before continuing to the bedroom. No explanation, no apology, just silence. The next morning, the whispers had spread beyond the classroom. In the library, students moved their bags when he sat down. In the gym, the guy spotting him on bench press suddenly remembered an urgent text. Jude tried to focus on his art history paper, but the words blurred. He had always been the quiet one, sketching in the margins of his notebooks, keeping his head down. Now his head was the only thing anyone noticed. By the end of the week, even the barista at the campus coffee shop hesitated before handing him his usual latte. "Sorry," she mumbled, though she never said for what. Jude nodded, paid, and walked away, the cup burning his palm like a brand. Inside, something was cracking. He had spent years building walls, smiling through family dinners where his dad talked about real men, laughing at jokes in high school locker rooms he never quite belonged in. Coming to college had felt like breathing for the first time. And now the air was gone. He thought about calling his mom, but the words stuck in his throat. How do you explain that your entire world had turned its back because of who you loved? He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror that Friday night, dark eyes hollow, and wondered if he had made a mistake trusting anyone at all. Jason, meanwhile, moved through his days like a ghost. Practice on the soccer field felt mechanical. His teammates joked about the drama in Psych, but he laughed along too loudly, his stomach twisting. He had read those texts before the professor did, Jude had sent them by accident while they were studying together the night before. Jason had stared at the screen, heart hammering, because the words mirrored something he had buried deep since freshman orientation. But admitting that would mean admitting everything. So he had done nothing. And now Jude sat alone in every class, and Jason couldn't bring himself to sit beside him. The guilt was a quiet roar in his ears. By Sunday, Jude had stopped trying to make eye contact with anyone. He ate cereal straight from the box in the apartment, avoiding the kitchen when Jason was home. The silence between them stretched like a canyon. When Monday's lecture rolled around, Jude chose a seat in the very back corner, hood up, earbuds in even though no music played. The professor began without acknowledging the elephant in the room, but the class knew. They always knew. And Jude felt the weight of every averted gaze pressing down until he could barely breathe. He didn't know yet that the letter forming in his mind would be the only voice he had left. The isolation settled in like winter fog over the Oregon campus, thick and unrelenting. Jude moved through his days on autopilot, attending lectures, turning in assignments, speaking only when called upon. His professors noticed the change. One even pulled him aside after art history to ask if everything was all right. Jude lied with a practiced smile. Just stressed about finals. Inside, the stress was a constant scream. He had stopped eating in the cafeteria altogether, opting instead for protein bars from the vending machine in the dorm basement. The walk across campus now felt like running a gauntlet. Groups of students he used to nod at now crossed to the other side of the path. One afternoon in the student union, he tried to join a study group for his sociology project. The three others exchanged glances. Then the girl in charge said, "We're actually full, sorry." Her voice was polite, almost kind, but the message was clear. Jude backed away, cheeks burning, and retreated to the library's top floor where no one ever went. There, surrounded by dusty reference books, he pulled out his notebook and began writing. Not for class. For himself. The words poured out raw, unfiltered. I thought college would be the place I could finally be me. Instead, being me made everyone else disappear. He wrote about Jason's silence, about the way his best friend's shoulders had tensed when those texts appeared on screen. He wrote about the fear that had lived in his chest since he was 14 and realized the boy next door made his pulse race in a way girls never did. At home, the apartment had become a battlefield of avoidance. Jason left early for morning runs and came back late from the library. Their conversations reduced to grunts about whose turn it was to buy milk. Jude noticed the way Jason's eyes flicked away whenever they passed in the hallway. Once, Jude caught him staring at the same psych textbook. Thumb paused on a page about identity formation. But when Jude opened his mouth to speak, Jason closed the book and left the room. The betrayal cut deeper than the shunning. Jason had been his anchor, the one person who knew everything and had promised it didn't matter. Now that anchor had drifted away, leaving Jude adrift. His family called on Wednesday night. His mom sounded worried. She had seen his Instagram stories. Empty. No friends tagged. Honey, is something going on at school? Jude sat on the edge of his bed, phone pressed to his ear, and lied again. Just busy with classes. His dad chimed in from the background, voice gruff. Keep your head down, son. College is for studying, not socializing anyway. The words landed like stones. Jude ended the call quickly, then stared at the family photo on his desk, him at 18, smiling beside his parents at high school graduation. He wondered what they would say if they knew the truth. Would they join the boycott too? The breaking point came during midterms week. In the group presentation for Psych 301, the professor assigned partners randomly. Jude's name was called with 3 others, including a girl named Mia who had been friendly before. When they met in the study lounge, the other 2 students found excuses to leave early. Mia stayed for 10 minutes, shifting uncomfortably, then said, I think I can finish my part at home. Jude sat alone at the table, slides half prepared, the empty chairs mocking him. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he finished the letter. It was 8 pages long, addressed to the entire class but mostly to Jason. He poured out the pain, the loneliness, the quiet hope he had once carried that maybe, just maybe, Jason felt something too. "I trusted you with the one thing I was most afraid of," he wrote. "And you let them turn me into a ghost." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply explained what their silence had cost him. By Friday, Jude had made his decision. He emailed the dean requesting an immediate transfer to the Portland campus for the spring semester. The paperwork would take time, but he could finish the term online if needed. He printed the letter, folded it carefully, and slipped it under the door of the psych lecture hall late that night when the building was empty. The next morning he packed a suitcase, left a note for Jason on the kitchen counter. "I'm moving out. Don't worry about the rent," and caught the early bus to the train station. As the campus receded in the window, Jude pressed his forehead to the glass and let the tears fall freely for the first time in weeks. He didn't know the letter had already been found. Jason discovered it first. He had skipped his morning run, guilt keeping him awake, and went to the lecture hall early to talk to the professor. The folded pages lay on the floor just inside the door. He recognized Jude's neat handwriting immediately. Sitting on the cold tile, he read every word. Each sentence landed like a punch. By the time he reached the final line, "I hope one day you understand what you lost by choosing fear," his hands were shaking. He looked up to find a few early students entering. One picked up a page that had slipped away. Within minutes, the letter was being passed around in hushed voices. The boycott had worked too well. Now the consequences stared back at them in black ink. The letter spread through the class like wildfire on dry grass. By the end of that Monday lecture, everyone had read at least parts of it. Professor Klein found the remaining pages on his desk and read them in his office, then canceled the rest of the week's discussions. "Something important has come to my attention," he told the class quietly. "We need to talk about respect." But the words felt hollow against Jude's raw honesty. Students who had moved their trays away now sat in silence, staring at their notebooks. Mia, the girl from the study group, cried quietly in the back row. Jason sat motionless, the letter's words replaying in his head on loop. Guilt settled over the group in layers. Some tried to justify it. "We didn't know it would hurt him that bad." But the excuses rang false even to themselves. Others texted friends outside the class, the story growing with each retelling. "That quiet guy in psych? He left because of us." In the cafeteria, the table where Jude used to sit remained empty, a silent memorial. Jason avoided everyone. He skipped soccer practice, claiming a sprained ankle, and spent hours in the apartment alone, rereading the letter until the paper creased permanently. Jude's words about trust cut deepest. Jason had felt the same pull since freshman year, the way Jude's laugh lit up their late-night study sessions, the comfort of his presence. But admitting it meant risking everything. His scholarship, his teammates' respect, his father's approval back in Idaho. So he had chosen silence. Now that silence had a name: cowardice. Jude, meanwhile, arrived at his parents' house in Portland with no explanation. He told them the transfer was for a better art program. His mom hugged him tight, sensing something deeper, but didn't push. His dad clapped him on the back and said, "Fresh start. Good." Jude spent the first week in his childhood bedroom, sketching endlessly. Dark figures turning away, empty hallways, a single letter floating in the wind. The Portland campus felt safer, smaller. No one knew his story. He joined a new study group in his first week, and when a guy named Alex smiled at him across the table without flinching, Jude felt the first crack of light in months. But the old pain lingered. Every time his phone buzzed with a notification from the old group chat, now silent, he wondered if anyone missed him. Back at Oakwood, the regret began to fracture friendships. Two girls who had been part of the initial whispers got into a shouting match in the dorm lounge. "We basically bullied him out," one accused. The other snapped back, "He should have kept it private." Jason overheard and walked away, stomach churning. He started seeing a counselor off campus, the first time he had ever admitted anything was wrong. The sessions peeled back layers he had buried. The pressure from his coach to be a leader. The fear of disappointing his family. The quiet nights when Jude's shoulder brushed his on the couch and his heart raced for reasons he couldn't name. The counselor asked gentle questions. Jason answered honestly for the first time. Spring break arrived and the class scattered. Jason drove home to Idaho instead of staying on campus. His father greeted him with the usual questions about grades and girls. Jason smiled through dinner, but later in his old bedroom he pulled out the letter again. The words had faded from handling, but the truth hadn't. He thought about texting Jude. His number was still saved, but what could he say? "Sorry I let them destroy you?" The cursor blinked for an hour before he deleted the message. Across the state, Jude sat on his parents' porch watching rain fall, sketching a new piece. Two figures reaching across a chasm. He didn't know Jason was thinking of him too. When classes resumed, the atmosphere at Oakwood had shifted. Professor Klein started every psych lecture with a 5-minute discussion on empathy and identity. Students participated cautiously at first, then more openly. A few approached Jason privately. "Did you know him well?" one asked. Jason nodded, throat tight. "Better than I thought." The conversations planted seeds. Slowly, the class began to see the boycott not as harmless gossip but as a collective failure. Yet Jude was gone, and the letter remained their only bridge to him. Jason folded it into his wallet, carrying the weight everywhere. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made the Oregon hills shimmer. Jude had officially transferred and was thriving in Portland. He had a part-time job at a local gallery, framing prints and chatting with artists who didn't care who he loved. Alex from the study group had become a close friend, nothing romantic, just easy conversation over coffee. For the first time, Jude felt seen without fear. He came out to his mom one quiet evening in the kitchen. She cried, hugged him, and said, "I always knew you were special." His dad struggled more, but he tried. Awkward questions over breakfast, a stiff pat on the back. The acceptance was imperfect, but it was real. Jude started painting again, bright canvases full of light breaking through clouds. The old letter stayed in a drawer, untouched. At Oakwood, Jason spent the summer interning at a marketing firm in Seattle. The city buzzed with life, and for the first time he noticed men the way he had once noticed Jude. A barista with kind eyes, a coworker who lingered during lunch. The realizations came in waves, each one terrifying and freeing. He joined a support group for queer athletes through the university's online resources, listening more than speaking at first. The stories mirrored his own fear of losing teams, families, futures. One night he stood up and said, "I let my best friend down because I was scared." The room nodded in understanding. Back in his tiny studio apartment, he wrote his own letter, this one to himself, listing every moment he had chosen silence. It was the first step toward honesty. Fall semester brought both men back to familiar rhythms, though miles apart. Jude took advanced studio art classes and volunteered at a youth LGBTQ center, mentoring high school kids who reminded him of his younger self. The work healed something deep. He dated casually once or twice, coffee dates that ended in warm hugs, but nothing serious. The scar from Oakwood remained, but it no longer defined him. He had grown into someone who could stand tall without apology. Jason returned to campus changed. He came out to his soccer teammates during a team meeting, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The reaction was mixed. Some clapped him on the back, others grew distant, but no one walked away entirely. His coach pulled him aside later. "Your game hasn't suffered. That's what matters." Jason moved into a single dorm, needing space to figure out who he was becoming. He kept the original letter in his desk drawer, pulling it out on hard nights. The class of former Psych 301 students had scattered into different majors, but a small group still met occasionally for coffee, talking about the Jude situation. They never used the word regret out loud, but it hung in every pause. One October afternoon, Jason walked past the old lecture hall and stopped. The door was open for cleaning. He stepped inside, the empty seats echoing. He could still see Jude in the back row, hood up. The memory hurt less now, replaced by determination. He pulled out his phone and searched Jude's name for the first time in months. A Portland gallery website appeared, Jude's name listed under featured emerging artists. Jason stared at the photo, Jude smiling softly beside a bright canvas, eyes no longer haunted. His thumb hovered over the contact link. This time he didn't delete the message. Winter rain lashed the windows of Jude's Portland studio apartment as he prepared for his first solo gallery show. Canvases lined the walls, bold abstracts that told stories of isolation turning to connection. Alex helped hang the final piece, the one with two figures reaching across a chasm. "This one's powerful," Alex said quietly. Jude nodded, throat tight. The show was in 2 weeks. Invitations had gone out to his new circle, but part of him wondered about the old one. He pushed the thought away. Growth meant moving forward. In Oakwood, Jason had made his decision. He drove the 3 hours to Portland on a gray Saturday, the letter tucked in his glove compartment like a talisman. The city felt alive with possibility. He parked near the gallery and walked the last blocks, heart pounding. Inside, the opening night crowd milled around, wine glasses in hand. Jason spotted Jude immediately. Dark hair longer now, laughing with a group near the bright chasm painting. He looked confident, settled. Jason's courage faltered. What right did he have to show up after everything? But the letter in his pocket urged him forward. Jude turned and froze. Their eyes met across the room, years of silence collapsing in a single glance. Jude excused himself and walked over, voice steady. "Jason." No accusation, just acknowledgement. Jason swallowed. "I read your letter. Every day for months. I was wrong." The words tumbled out. His own journey, the coming out, the regret that had reshaped him. Jude listened, arms crossed at first, then slowly relaxing. They stepped outside into the cool night air, rain pattering on the awning. Jason handed over a copy of the letter he had written to himself. Jude read it under the streetlight, eyes softening. They talked for hours about family pressures, societal expectations, the friends who had faded and the ones who stayed. Jason admitted the crush he had buried. Jude shared how the boycott had nearly broken him but ultimately forged him stronger. No grand declarations, just honest conversation between two men who had both grown in different directions. When they parted, Jude offered a simple hug. "I'm glad you came." Jason drove back to Oakwood that night lighter than he had felt in years. The reunion didn't erase the past, but it reframed it. Jude's show was a success. Reviews praised the emotional depth. Jason finished his degree and took a job in Portland, close enough for occasional coffee. Their friendship rebuilt slowly, movie nights, long walks, shared silences that no longer felt heavy. Family dynamics shifted too. Jason's parents met Jude over Thanksgiving and, after initial awkwardness, welcomed him. Jude's dad started asking about Jason's soccer stories. Society's gaze felt less heavy when shared. Years later, the two men stood on a sunlit balcony overlooking the Willamette River, the city of Portland stretching out in vibrant greens and blues. Jude, now a successful artist with pieces in galleries across the West Coast, adjusted the cuff of his button-down shirt. Jason, running a nonprofit for LGBTQ youth athletes, leaned on the railing beside him. Their lives had intertwined in ways neither had predicted. Close friends, chosen family, occasional dates with others that never quite fit because the bond they shared ran deeper than romance. The letter from college remained in a framed box on Jude's studio wall, a reminder not of pain but of resilience. They had faced more challenges along the way. Jason's father struggling to fully accept, Jude navigating industry biases, moments when old doubts resurfaced. But each time they chose honesty over fear. The original class from Oakwood had scattered. Some reached out over social media with apologies that arrived late but sincere. A few even attended one of Jude's shows, standing awkwardly before offering handshakes. The regret had done its work, forcing growth in quiet ways. On that balcony, as the sun dipped low, Jason turned to Jude. "Remember when I thought silence would protect me?" Jude smiled softly. "Remember when I thought leaving was the only answer?" They clinked their coffee mugs, the sound light against the evening breeze. The journey had been long, marked by betrayal and misunderstanding, sacrifice and awakening. Yet here they stood, stronger, kinder, fully themselves. True or false? One moment of prejudice in a crowded classroom can redefine two men's entire futures, but only if they choose to let the regret become redemption instead of chains.